Hey everyone, this is Sanjay extending a warm welcome to all of you. I'm a marketing executive at Upside Learning and your host for the webinar. Thank you for attending our webinar on Keep Learning. How can we enable and facilitate this? Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping things. You will be receiving a recording of the webinar after the webinar via an email. We have some polls lined up for you as well during the course of the webinar, so please do participate. We also have a brief survey at the end to help us improve your webinar experience in the future. And lastly, feel free to ask any questions to our experts using the chat facility. In case we are unable to answer any of your questions, we will try to answer them in our blog. Now, for some quick introduction about Upside Learning. For nearly 10 years, we have been helping organizations of different sizes and types to improve performance through better learning. With our head office in India, we serve clients based in the UK, USA, Australia, Middle East, North Africa, and other countries. A wide range of innovative learning solutions includes Upside LMS, a multi-award winning learning management system, Upside to Go, a mobile learning platform for performance support, and custom learning solutions for desktops, tablets, and smartphones. We have been recognized and awarded by Brandon Hall, trainingindustry.com, Deloitte, CLO, Apex, and Red Herring, and have won 32 awards and recognitions to date. So let's get straight into it. It is my pleasure to introduce you to the speakers, Alan Samuel, the Client Solutions Director of Europe, and Amit Garg, Director of Custom Learning Solutions for Upside Learning. Alan, over to you.
Thanks, Sanjay. And hello and welcome everybody from cold and grey London. I hope a lot of you are in places where the sun is shining. But thank you for joining us. And as Sanjay said, Amit will be working with me to present this webinar on Keep Learning. So let's get into it straight away. So what is Keep Learning and why is it important? We believe that learning is continuous. It is something that we really have no control over. Well, we do have control over elements of it, but it's a process which is ongoing, it's continuous, it surrounds us, and therefore it's something we need to recognize. So why is it important? In today's world, the speed of need, as we call it, has accelerated. So the requirement for us to have access to information, to be able to do things instantly, have accelerated. Technology hasn't helped, depending what your viewpoint is, but it's made a lot more of learning available, a lot more of information available, a lot more access. And frankly, it's unavoidable. So, there is no escape from it. Dan Pontefract, in his book, The Flat Army, who we'll be referring to very often through this presentation, talks about learning being collaborative. He talks about it being continuous and connected and community-based. We've seen via technology and our use of it that we collaborate a lot more, we share a lot more, we're willing to share a lot more than we've ever done in the past. And I think it's our ability to harness and use this to our benefit. But we all tend now to think more or less in the same space of collaboration and sharing. So I think this is to put a context of why Keep Learning is important, because it's there, it's around us. But is it important? So says who? Well, Robert the Bruce, for those of you who know the story, was inspired by a spider who was trying to build a web. And 6 times he tried and 6 times he failed. But the 7th time he did. Well, if Robert the Bruce didn't, certainly the spider did. Sarah Caldwell, a composer and operatic conductor, talks about learning everything you can, anytime you can, from anyone. And again, this kind of says, this is where we are, with the entire perception of keep learning, that it's around us. Michelangelo, even after 87 years of achievements like the Sistine Chapel, the sculpture of David, and so many more, at 87 still felt he was still learning. Here's another example how you can keep learning. Nothing stops us. And of course, Henry Ford says, the minute you stop learning, you're old. So we won't get into any of that, but the fact is that right through history and right through everything we do, there is this whole aspect that learning is continuous, learning is something that we will need to recognize. So moving on, what did you learn today? Can you think of something that you picked up today? And we'll address this a little later on. But typically it's, for those of you who have children, most often the answer is not much, but I personally like this one. Where did you learn today? Do you remember? Was it in a classroom? If you had a formal session scheduled, or did you pick something up? Were you watching television? When did it actually happen? There is no scheduled time for these things to happen. We pick them up as we go along. Do you remember why? Do you remember why you actually learned today? Was it something that you set out to do? Was it something that happened accidentally? Did you hear someone? And critically, how did you learn today? Before I jump into this, let's run a quick poll just to find out what people think of this. We're going to run it for about maybe 30, 45 seconds. As soon as everybody can get their answers in. Some interesting to watch how the answers keep coming in and the different things that people think they learned today. Okay, I think if everybody's in or we're still voting, we'll give it another 10 seconds. This is like being a game show host. Okay, so Amit, if I can ask you to take this and draw your conclusions from what people are saying.
Sure. Hello, everyone. This is Amit Garg. First of all, it's not an easy thing to quickly reflect on your day and say, what did we learn today? Because sometimes it may be so subconscious that you may not be aware of it. So we noticed that about 50% people responded to that question. Thank you for responding, jogging your memories, throughout what happened throughout the day and what's something that you learned today. So we're seeing almost 50% people actually learned a skill today, which is great to see. Probably you went to a program, probably you tried something, maybe you failed on something, and then you actually picked up the right way to do it. So there are various modes of picking that up. But yes, 50% picked up a skill, about 1/3 did find something, how something happens, a natural phenomena, something that they were probably trying to figure out. And a few others, about 15%, where to find something, restaurant, website, shopping, etc. Quite interesting. I think more important here is that we were able to reflect on that we learned something today. And the whole purpose of really putting up a question like this is to make us all realize that there is learning all around us, and we're doing that sometimes subconsciously. Alan?
Yeah, and I think just picking up on what Amit ended with there was, I think it's the realization for me in terms of that we actually looked back and remembered and said, yes, I did actually pick that up today, and it was very interesting. So before I let you go, or we go on into the next part of the presentation, we're going to run one more quick poll. So fingers on the buzzers again, please. And here we are. Do you remember how? It's very interesting to watch how the fluctuations of percentages go up and down as people respond. Give it another few seconds. We still have people voting, which is always nice.
Okay.
Yep.
I think
Over to you, Amit.
we have more responses this time, which is very good to see. Almost half did use technology, about 44% saying that they use technology to learn something, whether a phone or a tablet, or maybe others because we didn't really make it a comprehensive list, but some sort of technology. 1/3 they saw something, they heard something. Oh, sorry, they heard something. You know, someone told you about something new. So essentially learning from colleagues and peers. And about 22% saying that they saw someone do something by observation. Maybe it also includes TV, video, and other things. So maybe it was something that you intended to do. You set out to really find that. So you watched them do. But it could also include things that you just observed someone. You know, maybe it was not even a conscious attempt. So interesting. I think one key thing that we can take away from here is technology is certainly a big part of our learning today, whether consciously or subconsciously. Adam?
Yeah, great. And again, for me, looking at this, it also says that, A, yes, we were able to relate that, one, we learned something, B, that it did actually, we remembered where and how we learned it. But what's also, for me, was important is that 1/3 were told something, or, remembered that they were, so the informal side of that is very interesting as well. But let's move on and go back to our presentation. So, welcome to pervasive learning. This is what we have labeled this. This is what is being called and referred to as recognition, the fact that we are living in a world where we are surrounded by learning. And potentially we could end up with something like this. This is, again, just for reference, Hitachi came out with the concept of a smart windshield, which could throw all this information at you. And if, I shudder to think of when we'll be sitting there with all this being thrown at us and trying to make sense of it. But the fact is that it's already there. It's, it's something which is entering our lives via technology. And we are surrounded by technology and learning stroke information stroke resources, but everything that helps us in our, in our personal and work lives. So what exactly is pervasive learning? We've already said it's not something you can actually put a finger on. It doesn't come prepackaged in the corporate world. Learning exists outside the learning management system or the LMS. It comes in many forms. It comes in, videos. Our poll told us that, somebody, we learned from someone else. Somebody told us something. So there's no form for it. It's continuous. It's something that, is not going away. It's there all the time. There's no place that it happens. It could happen anywhere. It could happen, at work, on your commute, while in the car. How does it happen? I have an interesting theory here. Most often we use our senses. I've taken a school example of the 5 senses. So we already heard that somebody learned something, or 33% heard something by hearing it from someone else. We saw something, we touched or we did something. And typically in the workplace, this would translate into observation, trial and error, imitation and copying, listening, all these aspects of the way we are learning today. And lastly, of course, we saw the influence of technology. So technology, apart from being an enabler, is pervasive. Look at, most of us have this kind of technology ecosystem around us. In most cases, we will use one, two, maybe more of all of this. But this really is the world we live in, which is a pervasive learning world. Let's just quickly then think of, or look at what Pontifex defines pervasive learning as. And we talked about the speed of need earlier. But he says it's through formal, informal, and social. And we've seen that in our poll as well today, learning at the speed of need. His model of the way he illustrates this is the three aspects as formal, informal, and social. Most of our learning today is concentrated around the formal side of things, where we're using conferences, workshops, things like that. Informal is coming in, as you can see that as well when we talk about the current state of learning environments. But importantly, Dan actually advocates the 3-33 model, which is an equal split between the three of formal, informal, and social. The other learning model we're all familiar with more and more is 70-20-10, which puts the emphasis on the job training in informal. But whichever model we look at, we're seeing either 66 or 90% of the learning is informal, outside classroom, outside the structured environments which we normally tend to deliver learning in. And therefore, taking away from this, what you really need is a conducive environment which allows people this freedom and ability to learn. We need to provide learning opportunities, so making sure that not only the environment is conducive, but the opportunities to learn are there. And if we put all this together, what you're really creating is an environment of pervasive learning. Let's quickly move on to, all this is great, and when you're standing or driving your car and you come up to a junction which has road signs like this, which way do you actually go? And can you actually make sense of it? But this freedom and this access to information throws up its own challenges. Let's start at the bottom. The speed of change has accelerated, is much, much faster, because the information we have, the volume of it available, the access to have is huge. But there's also the question of how true or how real or how authentic is that information. You're accessing a lot of information, but we're still not really sure sometimes of how real or how true that information is. Have a look at this. This is one way of controlling information overload. I give you 10 seconds to have a quick read. So I think the simplest way is really the off button. But it doesn't stop the flow of information. What we're also seeing as a challenge is the fact that we're all going out there and finding information and sourcing knowledge ourselves. We're all part of networks which are informal and formal, where sharing and collaboration works. One of the big challenges for an organization would be to actually capture this kind of beg your pardon, informal knowledge. And how do we assess and measure how is this actually working in the organization? What is the state of individual and organizational learning? When so much of it, we saw, 66, 90% of it happening informally, are we able to actually translate that into any kind of measure of productivity, competencies, all the various things that we normally use? And critically, with so much of it happening outside our control, how do we actually manage this? Do we actually need to manage it? And I'm going to ask Amit here for his point of view in terms of, given this and given this volume of information, Amit, where do you think, and how do you think we need to manage these?
Yeah, I think it's true that all of us have been bombarded with so much of information. There are articles written about how much information is generated these days, uh, you know, which is in multiples of how much was generated in the last 50, 70 years. So it's likely to have its impact. One of the things that has been very interesting in terms of how we use and access that information is the research done by Professor Kelly at, I think Robert Kelly, at Carnegie Mellon University, where he's analyzed how much of information do we need to keep in our heads to get our work done. And he's done this analysis over the last 3 decades. And interestingly, that amount of information that we need to hold in our heads has come down dramatically from about 70 to 75% to just about under 10%. Now that's the amount of information that you really need to hold in your heads to get your job done, which obviously indicates that a lot of information is now either readily available, we can access it just when we need it. We just don't need to really memorize and hold it in our heads. Or the nature of work is changing to that extent. So I think that's one way of looking at it, which can impact the way we create knowledge and learning and performance support systems in organizations. The other way is for an individual to really manage this information workload, and I think people have their own mechanisms to skim through this information every morning or on a weekly basis. They subscribe to certain portals. Like for e-learning domain, I would subscribe to certain writers, to certain portals which would send a weekly summary. I could quickly skim through those, mark the important ones on, say, Scoop It, so even I don't forget the things that I found interesting, and then possibly combine those thoughts into something that I could myself write about or talk about. So that knowledge then becomes my own. You can always bounce that off through your social networks as well to get validations and further enhancements on that, to get different points of view. But yes, I think people would develop their own, shall I say, fighting mechanisms with all of this information overload, and that would eventually work out to some sort of their own personal learning network.
Great, thanks. And I think certainly it's not easy. You need to prioritize, etc. But yes, it's interesting times. So let's look at, we talked about today's learning environment. This is typically the environment we operate in today. As I said earlier, it tends to lean more towards the formal. There is elements of informal coming in. At best, it's inconsistent, but it's certainly, with the advent of models like 70-20-10, there is certainly a move towards creating more opportunities in this space. The social aspects, of course, continue to lag. Blogs, videos, and discussion boards are typically the extent or the limit to which an organization will go. And again, this is, for good reasons or otherwise, very, very closely monitored. But what are the real learning environments today? This is probably the largest and most used learning management system in the world. It's our first port of call. it's somewhere it's entered the lexicon of the English language. Um, you very often hear, oh, I Googled it, or why don't you Google it? So it's become a way of life for us. Professional networks like LinkedIn, um, excuse the shameless plug, but again, in the corporate space, we all use a lot of networks like this. I've just chosen LinkedIn as an example. SlideShare, and as Sanjay said, after this webinar, we will put the slides up as well for you to have a look at, apart from sending them to you. And it's a place where we go to for learning. We go to find out, what's been presented on this. And every time you do a Google search, you invariably will end up with some references to SlideShare. So these are our learning environments today. So it's really about embracing Dan's model and looking at all of this. But it's also about actually building and, enabling the tools for us to be able to do all of this. And again, I'm sure a lot of you are using this, and we'll do a quick polls as after this as well. But like Amit said, we have all this, and it's great, and it gives us a hell of a lot of information. But it's always difficult or a challenge to manage as well. So let's quickly do a poll on how you're using social media, which should pop up in a second. So what of these are you using? Again, I'm looking at the fluctuations of who's using what. It's very interesting to see how it goes up and down. Okay. Amit, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Again, I think very interesting. Facebook, of course, is the most common social tool or website that people have been using. But again, the kind of audience that we would have and we would have expected, LinkedIn is very popular. Twitter is popular too. I think we are all going to LinkedIn, Twitter, especially for things which may not be really for recreation or other aspects. Some of this is really coming into your work and learning, just keeping up with what's happening in the world in your domain. For instance, you may have really signed up for this webinar based on a tweet that you saw, or maybe a LinkedIn post that you saw. And we would imagine that you would take away a few points from here which would become your learning. And that's how I think all of us are trying to create our own personal learning networks, including a lot of social channels in that. One of the things that organizations can certainly do is to try and, one, open up some of these already existing predominant networks inside organizations, but at the same time also create, if possible and required, parallel networks internally, maybe within the LMS systems or outside LMS systems. But yes, that would kind of bring about a lot of knowledge sharing within the organization itself.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, and I guess, I saw some of the questions while Amit was talking. Most of us, obviously use more than one of these. What was interesting that 7% actually don't use any of this. So yes, that's one of the challenges, of the pervasive learning environment, etc. Of there are going to be people who may not, share our enthusiasm for technology always. But let's do a quick poll on how useful you think it is. This is like being a stockbroker and watching the market go up and down.
How much did you make today?
It's the 7 and 8% at the bottom, which is worrying. Great. I think we've got everyone there. And we'll go back to our analysts. Amit?
Yeah, I think now this is very interesting that Facebook is suddenly not so useful compared to the number of people who use it, while LinkedIn is definitely much more useful. So almost inverse ratios that we are seeing for LinkedIn and Facebook there. But yes, like I said, I mean, Facebook is probably a place where you while away some of your time, just get to see some photographs of friends, see some interesting updates, some maybe cat videos, whatever you find there and whatever your network uploads really. But what matters to you professionally and even from your personal learning perspective, growth development perspective, you'll find that more on LinkedIn, maybe on Twitter. So yes, interesting mix. Thank you for these responses.
Great, and I think just to add to that is the dilemma a lot of organizations are facing of putting their marketing onto Facebook. And there is a huge target audience out there, but it's still, I think the jury's still out on how useful it is. But yeah, that was interesting. Right, so okay, so we know what this is, we know it's all out there, and we know that we need potentially, if we could use it, it'd be very useful. So what and how do we actually enable this to happen? I've identified 4 components: people, content, technology, and critically, opportunity. We'll deal with the first 3 because opportunity is actually something that, again, we need to work on. But let's look at people to start with, and let's look at their profiles. Most of our people today are hugely aware of technology. We're seeing more and more of this. We talked about the speed of need. We talked about the point of need. A lot of what we do is point of need driven today. So we will access and use learning when we need it. We don't necessarily carry it around in our heads. Amit referred to this earlier in terms of the study done by Dr. Kelly. And my question is, how many phone numbers do you even remember anymore? We have very high expectations of technology. We expect technology to deliver consistently, constantly. And conversely, we have a very low tolerance of clunky tech. We want to get there in 1 or 2 clicks. We don't want to have to go around the houses to actually get there. We expect to be in control, control of access, control where we access it, over what, when. We also like to be able to customize it. All of us who are using smartphones will have a different home screen with all the apps and everything else that you want and which you most often use. Your desktops are customizable. Everything is, we expect it today. It's part of the world we live in. We're also independent networkers, as we saw from the social media side. We belong to different networks. We use different networks. We collaborate and share very freely. We go on to groups in LinkedIn, for instance, and ask a question, and you will always find people willing to share their learnings or how they dealt with a certain problem. Some of the YouTube videos are brilliant. I always admire the people who took the time to actually shoot something like that and put it out there, so when I need something, it's available. We separate our personal and professional, and we saw that with Facebook and LinkedIn and the others. And typically, we use multiple devices. We will use devices, and Amit will talk about this a little bit later on, about the use of different devices at different times. What about the content? Primarily, we need it quickly, easily accessed, and we need it searchable so we can find exactly what we are looking for. It needs to be relevant to my point of need. We said that earlier, the speed of need and the point of need. So information in context to that has become critical and become really an expectation of the user. We want to be able to use it straight away because, that's the reason we're actually pulling it up at that time. We're also using a lot more contributory content. I talked about groups in LinkedIn, and people say, here's a problem I had. How did you fix it? Somebody says, this is the way I did it. We need to capture that, and we need to use that. So contributory or user-generated content is becoming, something which we are looking for and which is part of what we do. Well, of course, as always, it needs to be engaging. It needs to grab our attention. It can't be boring. Quick quote from the Ministry of Education in British Columbia, Canada, where they stress that it's not about the student learning, but it's about learning the skills they need. And the three verbs they use is find, consume, think about, and apply. Sorry, four. Yeah, so it's all about access to information. It's about where can I go to find it, what kind of information do I need, and how do I use it. And it's all instant. It's all quick. It's all something, and again, sorry to bang on about, but it's all aligned to that point of time when you actually need it. Let's look at technology. We've already seen the social media aspect, so access, sharing, collaboration are the key drivers. We want to be able to work horizontally and collaborate with individuals, with groups, with communities. We want to extend our access across new technologies. We need to be able to factor in and adopt and use this technology. And here's, whoops, that shouldn't have happened. Sorry, we'll come back to that later. That link isn't working. But again, it's about discussion boards, it's about sharing, it's about collaboration, it's about learning from one another. And it's about bringing all these components together in a way that we can use and enable and facilitate the whole aspect of pervasive learning. Amit, any comments from you at this stage? Sorry, the slide I was supposed to pull up for you is not coming up, but I'm going to pull you in anyway.
No problem. I think yes. In the context of L&D staff or managers trying to create an environment where pervasive learning can happen more effectively, or staff are able to keep learning on a regular basis more consciously, and that also becomes a good knowledge repository for the organization. With that context in mind, I think there are several tools that can be utilized, and technology is certainly to our help there. Imagine having access to experts through your mobile phone, being able to search for answers in a forum, which is probably your organization's proprietary technology forum, or talking about your own products and services, or salespeople accessing data right before the meeting and trying to assess if someone else has done something similar, and if I can leverage that, maybe a presentation which was used for a client in similar industry, etc. Now, these are all simpler examples of what is possible these days with technology. The crux really is in trying to create that environment first, give that technology solution to the organization which can be leveraged and create such kind of opportunities. The end result is really people learning while they're working and using learning and assets and information, etc., to perform, not just to hoard the information and possibly pass an exam or get a certificate, but actually to perform. So I think it has more far-reaching effects, and technology is certainly available these days. It's about how do we implement it to create that ecosystem inside an organization.
Great, thanks, Hamid. Okay, so what's the other element that we need, and this is crucial. You can put the infrastructure in place, you can have access to all the platforms and tools and software and technology and everything else. But there is a cultural aspect. There is a culture of what do we need to do to make people, well, make is the wrong word, but to provide enough opportunity for them to recognize and to exploit it. And my friend, Mr. Einstein, sums it up quite clearly that what you really need is curiosity. You need that curiosity to actually exploit your environment, to learn from it, to extract the best elements from it. And without that, you can put it all out there, but it's the classic of taking a horse to water, but you can't make the horse drink kind of thing. So moving on from there, I think what I've identified are 6 key building blocks to actually facilitating and enabling this culture, and it's one of the key aspects. We talked about the challenge of managing an environment like this. I don't think there is managing required. It's facilitation and enabling that is really key. But it's also about creating access to learning experiences. For instance, can we make available, TED videos, for instance, is a great example. But how many people in an organization may have heard of it? Word of mouth will carry it so far. And I think that's where we need to actually come in and push it forward to make sure that it's available to everyone and recommended. We need to facilitate and enable collaboration sharing. It's happening today. It happens, but it happens in a limited, informal manner. We don't need to formalize it, but we certainly need to exploit it. There's a lot of information. We've for years talked about knowledge management, but really what you find is, in an organization you've got silos of information that we do not believe often is relevant to another department in the organization, and therefore we don't feel the need to share it. So it's this kind of collaboration sharing which will facilitate and build this culture. We do a lot of this in our personal lives. It's just that in the corporate world there is an element of control, there is an element of hesitancy to do this. Exploiting technology, we talked about that. Mobile phones and tablets have become part of our lives today. We're using them all the time, but they're still not recognized as a vital component of corporate infrastructure. It is coming, it is there, and we're seeing more and more of it. BYOD has helped as well. But again, it's a function of exploiting all of this, bring it together, because this is what we're used to using, and this is what we need, therefore, to build into our plans to make sure that information is available via this. And again, quickly talking about materials created and relevant to the context of need, which we've discussed. So what are the key drivers and influences of this? We talked about culture, we talked about the behavior of the organization, we talked about silos of information. We need to facilitate, we need to use the technology that's out there. We don't need to invest in a huge amount of expensive technology. There are free tools out there. Typically we need participation. We need user-generated content. We need users to come in and say, here's something which I found useful, maybe you can find it useful as well. That kind of thing. We saw in the first poll that people learned from someone saying something, or someone telling them how to do it perhaps. And are we really capturing and building best practice? But critically, please recognize, and this is obviously key to the whole culture, is that we're all in a permanent state of learning. We don't ever refuse to learn. Some do. But we're all in that permanent state of, oh, that's useful, I could use that, kind of mindset. And Dan Pontifax said it's a state of mind, it's community, it's collaboration. So these are some of the drivers that we need to look at and recognize to be able to build this culture. Again, to come back to the moments of need, this is actually a model proposed by Dr. Conrad Gottfriedson, who talked about the top, what are the 5 moments of need typically when you want to learn something or you want to learn more. When you're trying to remember or apply something, saying, I used to know how to do this, I can't remember it now. When things change, when you suddenly you're driving down a road and there's no entry sign now, what happens? That's the only way you ever knew. Or when something goes wrong, same no entry sign. But what I've tried to do is look at these moments of need and try to map what are the typical things we use, typical interventions that we use to actually try and address this. And at the bottom, what's the technology that we typically resort to. And I know Amit has done a lot of work in this area, so Amit, I'm going to pull you in here to talk about the context and moment of need.
Yeah, I think if you look at the first two, the kind of the middle boxes for each classroom, observation on the job, reading, watching, discussing, etc. These are all things that can be planned, and you can have more scheduled learning interventions around them. And these are essentially, for the purpose that they should be, which is when you are learning for the first time or when you're trying to learn more. But typically, the other 3 are the situations when things are not the way they should have been, ideally. That is, something has gone wrong, you've forgotten something, something has changed, etc. And you need to get the job done. I try and link it with actual work that people have to do, because learning in all practical sense for an organization, when we're talking from an enterprise perspective, has to tie in with some sort of a task, some works that was to be done. So all of these 3 instances on the right side are essentially those where something is stuck, something that needs to get done, something would not happen if the person did not learn in that moment. So all of these just-in-time moments of learning need, or what you would also call as performance support, tie in beautifully to the mobile devices. Now, what's really interesting is that these mobile devices have not been around for many, many years. They've just come around in the last 5-6 years in terms of the proliferation of smartphones and tablets that we've seen now, more so smartphones than tablets. And that is a great opportunity for all of us. We talked about creating an environment where people can leverage opportunities to learn from each other, from knowledge that's available, from documents, etc., search that, and just learn when they need. Mobile can actually increase the effectiveness even more, because these are devices that you're carrying just every time with you, all the time, wherever you are. So it just makes it so much more powerful if you were to create an environment and make it mobile friendly, where people can access information, experts, knowledge, whatever you have, through mobile devices whenever they need. Essentially, we need to think of making them more capable, empowering them to do their tasks in a more efficient manner. So whenever they are stuck, they should have access to the right resources. And now mobiles can make it possible.
Thanks, Amit. And I think, like we said earlier, we use a lot of this technology, we use all of this really very often in our personal lives. It's just that we need now to build an environment at work where we can use this with equal freedom and with equal success, actually. Okay, so back to this. So let me leave you with something to think about. Are we encouraging enough external collaboration? We're trying to build collaboration internally, but what about externally? Individuals are members of external organizations, groups, communities. Are we using that? Are we leveraging that? Amit just talked about mobile technology and tablets. They're the latest on the block. Google Glasses will probably be there sometime soon. We tried that recently. It's a bit awkward, but it's basically information at your fingertips or on your wrist. If you have a Samsung Gear or Galaxy, whatever. The importance of actually bringing user-generated content, because there's lots of stuff out there which people have found ways of doing things, interesting things which they've discovered and, which they may use, keyboard shortcuts. Are we actually building systems to try and capture that or to try and share? And do we need to build the access to enablers like, the LinkedIn and the Twitters and the Facebooks, where we can actually exchange views and learn things and collaborate and contribute? Think about it. Critically, we talked about being in a perpetual state of learning, so don't ever stop being a learner, and don't stop your people from learning. We should be catalysts, we should be enablers, we should be facilitators. We need to build the environment, the museums of learning, or the go-to place for learning. And really, as enablers, as facilitators, we need to nudge and to direct people, to show them the opportunities and the benefits and the experiences, so that, we keep learning to keep learning. That's a quote by me, incidentally. So I think that kind of brings us to the end of this. Thank you very much for your listening, and I hope you found it useful. Before I wrap up, I'm going to bring Amit back in to summarize, but I think from what I've seen, and if there are any interesting questions, we can certainly look at that. So, what's the back channel been saying, Amit?
I've been able to keep pace with back channel, and thanks Rama for appreciating the quote by Alan. Just to add, I think to all the several people that you quoted in the beginning about continuing to learn and being curious, etc. I think more recent one being the new CEO of Microsoft. In his first letter to staff, I think he mentioned about, I buy more books that I can finish, and I enroll for more webinars and programs than I can ever attend. But then what he really highlights there is the desire to keep learning is the most essential one for anybody to grow. And that's exactly what he said to all the Microsoft staff. What he's really highlighting is the desire to learn, because you will find numerous opportunities as individuals. As L&D professionals or managers and people who are responsible for ensuring work, productivity, or just learning, training, and development, I think giving those opportunities and empowering people to be able to do something like this would be excellent. I think if we can try and do that in our organizations, that will just make it easier for people to keep learning.
Great, lovely. Thanks, Amit. And thank you, everyone, for taking the time out this afternoon. There is a lot more information on our website and on our blog. Please feel free to drop me a line at the email ID, or I'm on Twitter, Alan2907. And keep learning. Thank you very much.
Thank you.